Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the new unit analysis and comparisons. I've decided, if you are new to this series, it is basically a competitive Fire Emblem Heroes take on the brand new units, what roles they fulfill, and how they're comparable to other more accessible units, let's say. And then I want to talk about their roles compared to those units as well. The different approach that I'm going to take on these comparisons will be that I will consider them at their best, maximum investment. So while I do have budget in consideration, I will not hold back on using skills and fodder such as bonus doubler, mystic boost, distant counter, close counter to tell you how the optimal units invested should be, but not for these new units, but for older units, and how you should consider investing in them rather than the newer units, and realize that you do not need these units in one way or another. So that's what we'll accomplish through today's video, as we always do. As always, I'll also look at the mathematics at the end. Big thank you to my amazing Discord community. You guys are the best. Elimir specifically, who does these new mathematics, which we'll show at the end. You can find that on Discord as well. I do post them in the news channel there. With that being said, if you're hype about mock battles, I want to let you know that I am actually doing reviews and analysis on stream going forward. So if you aren't familiar with the Twitch channel, go check that out. And there are definitely going to be some good times ahead of us because of that new feature. And I'm going to really look at some of the best maps that the community has to offer. Like, I'm talking unbeatable strats, hopefully. Or if you think you can take something out of it and learn, definitely take advantage of that. With that out of the way, let's talk about what we got. So first up is Mareeta, and Mareeta is better Mia. Rest in peace. Whatever. Okay, it doesn't matter because Mia's a 5-star exclusive and has been Thanos from the summoning pool anyways, so she's just new Mia at this point. Mareeta actually has a really cool preference weapon, which allows her to double without retaliation, kind of like the spaghetti tome that Lewin has, and that's pretty good for a Gale Force unit along with that cooldown reduction. Makes her a good Gale Force unit even as a one-off. However, there is a better Gale Force unit, also Red Sword Infantry, and you probably have him but completely forgot about him. That guy. Yes, that guy. So that guy over there has a 2-charge Gale Force on turn 1, 1 hit of a Flashing Blade, and he has Gale Force ready. One of the biggest problems that Gale Force units have is sometimes they one-shot units because their attack stat might be too high. Now Navarre doesn't, even if he does one-shot something, that's okay because he has his Gale Force reduced to 2-charge at the beginning, which makes him really consistent as a Gale Force unit. His speed stat is still really good. It's not like 41 good, but it's still really good. And if you consider just a few merges, which probably wouldn't even cost you grails because you probably have copies of him. I hope you do. And even if you spend 100 or 150 grails, it's not that much. He ends up being fairly comparable to new units like this that want to do that same exact role. Consider, of course, that this is all with AR offense in mind, but even if it's on AR offense and you want a solid red Gale Force consistent unit, Navarre is your man for that. The build itself isn't even that expensive. It's just solid, nice kind of things. You can definitely change around things. You could use Quick Impulse, for instance. You could use Wings of Mercy. You could use Hidden Run, Pass. There's a lot of options you can go with here. Honestly, though, there is really not a better unit than Navarre right now for Red Sword or even Gale Force units in general. His weapon is that good. However, I wanted to talk about the use of Flashing Blade 4, and I did mention this maybe briefly in the impressions video from yesterday, and I think the best candidates for this skill are definitely units like that, which are Anna. Anna is a type of low attack unit that generally won't be securing kills too often, and maybe even if you use her off season, just as like a base merge unit, she's going to appreciate some of the extra damage from Flashing Blade, and she has the right stat spread to be a Gale Force unit. So if you're going to fodder off like Flashing Blade 4, and you also want to take advantage of the fact that Anna is a rotating bonus unit, both AR and Arena, to be honest, then she's one of the better candidates to do it with. Noatin is actually a really I feel like slept on weapon as well. Having escape route on your weapon or just teleport like flyer formation shenanigans along with Wings of Mercy lets her be like anywhere you need them to be when performing these Gale Force strategies. So that makes her pretty good. Of course, if you don't want to, you could always just run the Slaying Axe, Flashing Blade kind of build as well, and then your seal would be open in that case. But honestly, like Noatin has a place, and the whole bonus stats, Gale Force stuff that you see on the left side there is exactly what Anna is capable of doing. Okay, so moving on, we have probably the most beautiful man of the banner, Berkut. I'm impressed by this stat spread. I figured that he would have something similar to his old one, and I think it's almost near identical, maybe with some points give or take in a few places. It does help that his distant counter weapon denies a double from the enemy. So, as I said, in the future, if like the Astro Mythics or just any mythic hero ends up being a cavalry unit and you combine him with Caden, this unit will be a very good tank. However, and most of the utility will come from the fact that he kind of sets up other units, whether that's through Brazen's Vantage, Wings of Mercies, or escape routes and stuff. That I think is where most of the utility comes from. But generally speaking, if you want that blue cavalry tank unit, there is already 2 units that do it almost as good, if not better in some cases. So we already have a blue Lance Cav that many of you forgot about, which is Camu. And Camu has that distant counter weapon, doesn't have the drawback or the benefits of Crimhild, but you can still use him and he still is just fine. In fact, the extra speed may be more of a boon than a detriment. Light Blessings patches up his otherwise low res stat, but with Ward Cavalry stacking, you can definitely take advantage of that. Consider, of course, he's not going to cost you like any orbs, unlike Berkut. Secondly, we have Berkut himself. Big shocker there, right? So, yeah, Casablanca is an extremely good inheritable lance because it has dual range built in. And if you're familiar with some of the better null C like tank units right now in AR offense, it's going to be stuff like Donald, honestly, because he can run Casablanca, built-in dual range, soul, and the only thing with like cavalry units is they can't run that null C, but they can use Mystic Boost, for instance, in B. They could use stuff like Vantage instead, and that's already pretty good. So I think if you're going to run a tank build, Mystic Boost is ideal, but foddering that air may not be useful to you unless you're already consistently like tier 27 every week. But nonetheless, if you already have Berkut, don't forget you already have older Berkut, and older Berkut is still good. He still has a really good stat spread. It's actually still unique to him from the Blue Lance Cavs. Slow, bulky, and bolt stats. So between him and Camu, you can still use the older ones and still perform the function of new Berkut almost the same. The difference is, of course, that new Berkut has that utility by denying follow-ups, which generally doesn't matter because you should be trying to one-shot on enemy phase anyways, but the 20 damage could matter later if a cavalry unit ends up synergizing with that pretty well. Anyways, moving on. Brand new Corrin, which apparently has 1 billion BST. Now, I mentioned this in yesterday's impressions, and I'm still not that impressed, believe it or not, regardless of whether she's colorless, and regardless of her weapon seemingly good, because by herself she would get lots of stats, and the fact that she has high BST. But the thing is, she's still a dragon at the end of the day. She's still a 5-star exclusive at the end of the day. And generally speaking, some colors of dragons are more favorable than others based on how the current meta is in AR as it stands. For example, you'll see big nukes coming from range units, and those range units, just to name a few, are pretty much Deirdre, Julia, Ophelia, Lelina, maybe Sonya come to mind as some of the more prominent ones, of course with Alma as well, but he's colorless. But when you consider all that, the only one that has big impact on dragons is Deirdre and Julia. Now, Deirdre and Julia are green, so of course the best comparable dragon there is honestly just Faye. So Faye ends up probably in a bad matchup against Lilina, but this is counteracted by the fact that Ophelia is such a common nuke as well. You pretty much always see the combo together. So Faye counterbalances the extra damage that maybe Lilina does with her stat being as high as it is. Faye is res, that is, versus Lilina's extra damage. In fact, Faye has almost no problem tanking stuff like Lilina because of her high res stat. The most ideal dragon builds are not actually going to use stuff like Solitary Breath, which I think or Savage Breath is what Corrin has here. No, the most ideal kind of breath you want to use is actually Lightning Breath Bonus Doubler, because you don't have to use Distant Counter in the A slot, and Bonus Doubler is such a powerful skill when you combine it with like Kaden, for instance. Kaden himself giving like 6 to all stats, Faye buffing herself by 6 to all stats, Lightning Breath giving a distant counter effect, and you're looking at ridiculously high buffs into like 18 plus. Like, she pretty much has so much bulk. Faye also has a really big niche that I want to mention that people forget, especially when Alm is in play here. Alm cuts a lot of defense. Faye's lowest stat is defense, so Alm doesn't get as much value through cutting the defense, and Faye's best stat is HP. And HP is 1-to-1 effective kind of bulk against Alm because it's not being cut, it's not being reduced. He doesn't do percentage HP damage, he just does percentage. He does extra damage based on defense, cutting through that defense. So Faye is actually a pretty good tank in that regard. All that being said, if you're going to use new Corrin and you merge her up and spend thousands of orbs, the way you do it is the same way as you would use Faye, which is changing out the breath for Lightning Breath with Bonus Doubler, and then just taking advantage of the extra stats that Corrin has. But the difference isn't that big. Faye is 10 BST lower, I guess, but there's 5 extra flowers you can give Faye, so the difference ends up being 5 stats overall. It's not really that big of a discrepancy. And the thing is, Corrin has less res and neutral matchups against everything, so she's not better in almost every case. I think the advantage that happens here is that Corrin may have a better time dealing with Air, who generally has really high speed, and Faye may struggle to match that sort of speed when you consider Quick Riposte versus Lithia in that case, where it becomes a speed check. But yeah, if you have Corrin, like a one-off like this is probably going to do a decent job, but it's not that much better or even different than what Faye has in terms of stats. When you consider that a lot of people may have already merged up Faye, or maybe you've merged up a couple times, don't sleep on Faye. She's still really good. And I definitely recommend her over like Noe, for instance, because Noe just hard loses to stuff like Julia and Deirdre, whereas Faye can at least challenge them and not completely get slaughtered by the effective triangle advantage situation. So, moving on. New Tiki. And out of all of them, this is probably one of the better units as a one-off, because armored dragon and takes away the mobility issues and can run Fallen Shield in the A. So what you have here is pretty much a 2-movement infantry dragon that's colorless, kind of like Corrin, but less investment, because you don't need like distant counter, for instance. I don't think she's as good as Canagus, because again, hitting res isn't ideal and still has the dragon weaknesses, but nonetheless, at least removing that armor mobility makes her like a 2-move unit in most cases. The weakness of self-buffing could be a problem as well when you don't want to buff and probably get hit by panic weapons. That's not always fun. Her HP is okay when you consider like summoner support and like blessings, but beyond that, like, you know, she's okay, but not really something that I would consider merging up when you have to really consider contenders like Canagus or Legendary Mythic orbs really being that important to go for. Anyways, in the pools, we do have winner Cecilia as a colorless armored unit that's comparable. The difference here is that Cecilia ends up having an armor weakness, assuming you don't use Fallen Shield, whereas Tiki has the dragon weakness. So a bit different because you're hitting res. Tiki also has better mobility, Cecilia doesn't, but being ranged is an advantage, of course, because sometimes you may be able to snipe units from that range rather than going straight into like really deep territory by using someone like Tiki instead. The build I've shown on the left with Cecilia doesn't require any extra grails. You probably got 2 copies already, and it's more or less just like an anti-range build. With some AR defenses actually just being full ranged, that build ends up being pretty decent there because Winter Cecilia's res is very impressive, and even stuff like chill res and whatnot are not really going to bring her down too much when you maybe consider somebody like male Corrin nearby buffing her an additional like 5 or 6, 8 res or something like that. So as an additional one, and probably like the best version you could do of Winter Cecilia, which I do recommend as well, uses something super high investment with Lethal Carrot, Close Counter, Special Fighter, Noontime. This lets you get even more damage out of it, and it gets some consistent healing through Noontime as well. The other one does have it, but this one does it a bit better because of the Wo Dao effect plus Special Fighter. So yeah, that is a prime Winter Cecilia build. Doesn't cost you thousands of orbs, just enough to pretty much carry your colorless armor roll pretty well for a tank. Okay, and a quick look at Dragon herself. You get like 1 or 2 copies. This is primarily the way I would recommend using her, which is again not that high investment when you consider the Special Fighter was just on a Hero Fest, and if you were sniping green with the 10 or so tickets we got, you probably have Special Fighter in one way or another, or you know, she actually just comes with Special Fighter, so the extra Special Fighters could go to something else like Winter Cecilia if you wanted a secondary tank on a different season. But yeah, putting that Fallen Shield, Solitary Dream is pretty good because in this case you have your 2 move all the time. She shouldn't really be beside any other units anyways when you consider like M-Corn or supportive units generally using wards or drives. The advantage is of course ward armors as well if you are brave enough to use a bunch of armors, but there is war dragons as well if it wasn't so rare that you could have it on more mobile dragons as well nearby, buffing her that way. But yeah, not bad. Stat spread is pretty good, but not as good as Winter Cecilia if you consider all the magical damage, and hitting res isn't as desirable as physical damage from what I can tell. Okay, and finally the free unit provided to us is the puppet Delphia herself. So Delphia is probably another disappointment. I don't think she's as disappointing as Har or Rutger or Leo, but at least she has some use. The problem is that most people already have many copies of Mei, and Mei doesn't have that much desirable fodder. So plus attack Mei is literally gonna be comparable or even better than Delthea. Delthea seems like a pretty good PvE unit if you want to use her that way, with like Fury Desperation or even Life and Death Desperation, because her tome does retaliation damage. So if you want some disgusting kind of just PvE sweeper, it's pretty good. But generally speaking, you probably have an Ophelia or a Mei at this point, and those units just kind of do it better in the nuke roll. What I'm showcasing on the left is a Mei that you might want to use on air defense. So consider that maybe like a budget Ophelia on air defense. With Quick Impulse, you can get you some pretty solid AoE damage that way. Shine is not a meme, by the way. It's the highest attack tome. So Life and Death, Quick Impulse, Blazing Wind, 2 Dumas giving you extra attack, and you go for a big nuke that way. Similar to Ophelia if you don't have her. But yeah, like that's one way to do it. If you want to use Mei as well in a different way on air offense, the Close Counter Vantage Blade build is kind of good on her, very ideal actually, with Ophelia being the contender to it. So yeah, but merging up Mei is much easier than merging up Ophelia, plus you don't waste as much good fodder. Res Smoke is kind of rare and Close Counter as well, but beyond that, Mei is one of the better blade mages for at least the blue slot, green being Nino and red being like Tharja for instance. Finally, a comparable Delphia build, if you want to use her on air defense, would just be the same way as the other blue nukes. So you can take advantage of Death's extra stats, Death Blow, and Hardy Bearing to counter a lot of those vantage strats that you may run into on air defense. That pretty much summarizes Delphia. I think she's better, like more useful than somebody like Har or Rutger or Leo for sure, but it's not the most impressive of free units when you consider the rest of the banner. That pretty much summarizes the new units, I'd say. Again, I still think that Tiki is probably the best as a one-off, or maybe Mareeta, with the other ones kind of being more disappointing, unless you go for extensive merges and investment. Finally, we have our mathematics for the banner. And just to clear up, of course, some misconceptions, color sharing between Tiki and Corrin is a good thing, especially if thinking about the fodder or maybe just having a one-off of the unit. It is much easier to get them with a low amount of orbs and pick up maybe something like Sudden Panic or Special Fighter. So if you're using those free summon tickets or dropping a bit of orbs for some extra colorless, then yeah, you could see a good chance of picking those up. But yeah, when it comes for Berkut and Mareeta, you may want to just wait until a Legendary Mythic banner down the road, or if you're planning to add extra merges to stuff like Tiki and Corrin in the long term, then just wait for the banners later where they're going to show up on 2 or 3 person banners. I don't even know if 2 person banners exist anymore, but at least 3 person banners should still be a thing, and that's where you'll get better value for your orbs because it costs less to pick up these units as dictated by the mathematics shown here. Okay. So that covers our unit comparison analysis for today, guys. Thanks for watching as always. I will be showing you guys a weapon refine analysis within a few days. There's also an Allegiance battle impressions tips video that I'm going to be releasing soon, so look forward to that stuff. Give the video a thumbs up if you haven't already. Sub to the channel if you haven't, and let me know in the comments below of anything or anything that you think might be useful for these units that I may have overlooked. All right, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.